I thought the Arctic was just cold and empty, but the warehouse has rules that go beyond survival. I broke one, just once, and now the frozen silence hides something that knows my name. Do you think you could survive a job where the darkness is alive and the rules are the only thing keeping it out? Welcome back, friends. You know, life is full of mysteries, some we can explain, and some we can only feel in our bones. On this channel, we dive into those haunting stories that make your heart race and your mind wander into the unknown. If you've ever sat in the dark and wondered what could be hiding just beyond the silence, then you're in the right place. So grab a warm drink, sit close, and let me take you on another unforgettable journey. When I first saw the job listing, it almost seemed like a joke. Warehouse attendant needed, remote work in the Arctic, generous pay, free lodging and meals, immediate start. I had been drifting through temp jobs, barely scraping enough to keep myself afloat, so the offer was too good to ignore. I didn't think twice about the location or the conditions. All I saw were dollar signs and the promise of steady work, something I hadn't had in months. The journey itself was grueling. They flew me in on a small, twin-engine plane, the kind that rattled and groaned against the wind as though it hated every minute of being in the air. Through the frost-crusted window, I could see nothing but endless white stretching out in every direction. It was like flying over an ocean frozen in time, without a single landmark to reassure me that we were heading anywhere at all. By the time we landed on the makeshift airstrip carved into the ice, I was already regretting my decision. The first person I met was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a thick beard crusted in frost. He didn't smile or shake my hand, just nodded and told me to follow. His voice carried the kind of weight that didn't invite questions. I dragged my duffel bag across the ice, shivering, even though I was bundled in layers. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a hulking metal structure half buried in snow. It looked more like a bunker than a place of work, the kind of building that was meant to withstand not just storms, but something worse. Inside, the air was warmer, but only just. A dull hum echoed through the steel corridors, a constant vibration that made my teeth itch. The man led me through winding halls until we reached an office. There, another figure waited. She was tall, too thin, her skin pale in a way that suggested she had not seen sunlight in months. She introduced herself as Marta, the site manager. "You're here for night duty," she said, her voice flat. "Most of the staff are on day shift. You'll keep things running when the others sleep." I nodded, waiting for her to explain the actual work. Instead, she slid a piece of paper across the desk toward me. I picked it up, expecting a contract, maybe a safety guide. What I found instead was a list. At first glance, the rules seemed almost childish, the kind of warnings you give a child trying to scare them into behaving. But the way Marta stared at me, unblinking, made it clear she wasn't joking. 1. Never leave the warehouse after midnight, no matter what you hear outside. 2. If you hear footsteps in the storage aisles when you are alone, do not investigate. 3. Never go near the frozen loading bay doors after 3 a.m. 4. Keep every mirror covered after sundown. Do not look into them. 5. If the intercom crackles, respond only with silence. Do not speak back. 6. Should you find any boxes unmarked with inventory numbers, leave them untouched. Report them immediately. 7. At dawn, open every windowed panel in the east wing. Never miss a day. I looked up from the list, half expecting her to smirk and tell me it was some initiation prank, but her expression remained as cold and fixed as the ice outside. "These are not suggestions," she said. "You follow them. You stay alive. You break them, and we'll be finding your replacement before the snow melts." My stomach tightened. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the bearded man, the one who had brought me here, shifted his weight and let out a low grunt. His eyes told me not to push. The rest of that first day passed in a blur of routine. They gave me a tour of the facility, showing me the endless rows of stacked crates and industrial shelves that stretched higher than my head. The warehouse was enormous, so much larger on the inside than I'd expected from its exterior. Each aisle looked identical, cold fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, shadows pooling in the corners where the bulbs flickered. Marta explained the basics, logging incoming shipments, checking inventory, keeping the place secure through the night. The work itself wasn't complicated, But the silence of the place made it eerie. Even when other workers were around, their voices seemed to vanish into the steel walls, swallowed up as if the building resented sound. By the time the others packed up to leave, I realized how truly alone I would be. The day shift moved like ghosts, barely glancing in my direction as they slipped out through a reinforced side door. Soon, I was left standing in the middle of that cavernous warehouse with nothing but the hum of the lights and the faint groan of the wind outside. The first few hours passed without incident. I busied myself with checking the logs, walking the aisles, and double-checking the locks on the various storage rooms. My footsteps echoed too loudly against the concrete floor, making it sound like someone else was always following close behind. Around midnight, I remembered the first rule: never leave the warehouse. I laughed nervously to myself, wondering what exactly they thought I'd do. Wander out into the sub-zero wilderness for fun? Still, as the wind picked up outside and a low, mournful howl rose through the cracks in the walls, I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. It sounded almost human, like someone crying out in the distance. I forced myself to focus on the inventory list, muttering numbers under my breath to drown out the wind. The humming of the lights seemed to grow louder, vibrating in my skull, until I almost didn't notice it at first. The sound of footsteps. They were faint, shuffling, coming from somewhere deep in the storage aisles. My instinct was to grab the flashlight and go see who it was. Maybe another worker had stayed behind, or maybe Marta was testing me. But the paper in my pocket felt like it was burning against my thigh. Rule number 2, do not investigate the footsteps. My throat tightened. The sound grew louder, closer, until I could swear they were circling just around the corner of the aisle. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my chest, and waited. Then, as suddenly as they had started, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating, until I couldn't take it anymore. I switched on my flashlight and shone it down the aisle, sweeping the beam across crates and shelves. Nothing. Empty. The sound must have been in my head. That's what I told myself. But when I turned back toward the office, I noticed something odd. A box sat in the middle of the floor, directly in my path. It wasn't there before. There were no labels, no inventory markings, just a plain wooden crate with frost clinging to its surface. Rule number 6. Do not touch unmarked boxes. Report them immediately. I backed away slowly, keeping the flashlight trained on it as though it might move on its own. My pulse hammered in my ears. The intercom above me crackled to life, the static sharp and jarring. I nearly dropped the flashlight. For a moment, there was only static. Then a faint whisper slipped through, too quiet to make out the words, but insistent, like someone pleading. My hand trembled as I stared at the speaker. The rule said not to respond, so I didn't. The static grew louder, angrier, before cutting off with a sharp click. The silence that followed was unbearable. I turned and hurried back to the office, locking the door behind me. The rest of the night dragged by, each second stretching into eternity. I didn't sleep. I sat at the desk, staring at the clock, waiting for the first light of dawn. When it finally came, weak and pale through the frosted windows, I felt like I'd survived something I couldn't yet understand. I forced myself to follow the last rule. I walked to the east wing, opened the windowed panels one by one, letting the cold morning air spill inside. It didn't feel like a ritual. It felt like a ward, as though I was lifting some invisible weight that had pressed down on the warehouse all night. When Marta returned with the day shift, she gave me one look and nodded. "You made it through your first night," she said, as though that was an accomplishment in itself. I wanted to ask about the footsteps, the box, the whisper in the intercom. But something in her eyes told me I already knew the answer. This was only the beginning. The second night began much the same as the first. The day shift filed out without a word, leaving me alone with the endless rows of crates and the low hum of the lights. But this time, I wasn't as naive. I carried the list of rules in my breast pocket, folded and creased from how often I checked it during the day. Every time my hand brushed against it, I felt a strange comfort, as though the thin piece of paper was a lifeline, holding me back from some abyss I couldn't see. Still, I couldn't ignore the unease gnawing at me. My mind kept circling back to the box from the night before, the one with no markings, sitting alone in the aisle like it had been waiting for me. When I reported it to Marta that morning, she didn't look surprised. She just scribbled something in her ledger and said, "You did the right thing. Don't worry about it." Her tone made it clear that asking questions wasn't welcome. I told myself I'd get used to this place, that after a few nights, the silence and the strange rules would become routine. But when midnight came and the wind outside rose into that same low, mournful howl, the old dread crept back in. I stayed near the office as long as I could, doing my work from the small desk by the flickering lamp. But the warehouse seemed restless, its vast, shadowed aisles calling me deeper in. It was close to 2 in the morning when I heard it again. The footsteps. They were faint, dragging, the sound of someone walking slowly along the concrete floor. My body stiffened, every muscle tensed, but I didn't move toward it. Rule number 2 was clear: never investigate the footsteps. Still, it was worse to sit and listen, knowing they were out there, than to see nothing at all. The sound lingered for long minutes before fading again, swallowed by silence. I tried to distract myself with the logbook, but my eyes kept darting to the clock. That was when I noticed the time. 2:50. The frozen loading bay doors came to mind. Rule number 3, never go near them after 3 a.m. Curiosity clawed at me. I'd walked past those doors during the day. They were massive, reinforced steel things, their seams crusted over with thick ice. They looked like they hadn't been opened in years. What danger could there possibly be? As the minutes crept toward 3, I told myself I just wanted to check that the locks were secure, that nothing had changed. But really, it was the pull of the unknown. I needed to see what could make a rule like that necessary. By the time I reached the loading bay, my breath came in shallow clouds. The air here was colder, sharp against my skin, even through the layers of clothing. The doors loomed before me, frost shimmering in the pale light. At first, nothing seemed out of place. The heavy chains and padlocks were intact. The ice clung thickly to the edges. I almost laughed at myself for being so worked up. But then, as the second hand on my watch ticked past 3, a sound drifted through the metal. It was faint, muffled, but unmistakably human. Knocking. 3 slow-botched, deliberate knocks echoed through the steel, reverberating deep in my bones. I staggered back, nearly dropping my flashlight. My throat went dry. Someone or something was on the other side. The knocks came again, louder this time. Then a voice. It was a woman's voice, soft but urgent, slipping through the cracks like smoke. "Please," it whispered. "Let me in. I'm freezing." I stood frozen, staring at the door. Every rational thought screamed at me to run, to get as far away as possible. But another part of me, the part that still clung to the idea of logic and reason, whispered that it could be real. Maybe someone was stranded out there. Maybe their life depended on me. My hand hovered over the chains. The voice grew more desperate. "I know you hear me. Please help me. I'm dying out here." That was when the flashlight flickered. The beam sputtered once, twice, before cutting out completely. The warehouse plunged into darkness. My breath caught in my throat. I fumbled with the flashlight, smacking it against my palm, but nothing happened. The only light came from the faint glow of the emergency bulbs high above, casting long, trembling shadows across the doors. The knocking grew frantic. The voice sharpened, rising in pitch. "Open it. Open it now." Something in the tone made my stomach turn. It no longer sounded human. The desperation was gone, replaced by something mocking, something that knew I was listening. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a pallet. My hand brushed against the paper in my pocket. The rules. They seemed to pulse with meaning. Rule number 3. Never go near the frozen loading bay doors after 3 a.m. I turned and ran, the sound of fists pounding against steel following me down the corridor. The voice shrieked, echoing through the warehouse, each word sharper than the last. "Coward! Open the door! Open it!" By the time I reached the office, I was gasping for breath. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and curled into the chair, my hands trembling. The pounding faded slowly until only silence remained. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the floor, afraid to move. At some point, the intercom crackled again. I froze, listening. Static hissed through the speaker, then the same voice, eerily calm now. "You can't keep me out forever," it whispered. Then the line went dead. When dawn finally broke, I felt like I hadn't blinked once. My eyes were raw, my mind numb. I forced myself to follow the final rule, dragging my body to the east wing to open the windowed panels. As the pale light spilled in, some of the pressure lifted from my chest, but not enough. When Marta arrived, she studied me carefully. Her eyes lingered on the way my hands shook, the dark circles under my eyes. "You went near the doors, didn't you?" she asked, her tone flat but heavy with certainty. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're lucky. Most who hear her don't come back." Her. The word echoed in my head. I wanted to demand answers. Who was she? What was out there? What exactly this warehouse was guarding? But I bit my tongue. Marta wasn't going to tell me. Not now. Maybe not ever. Instead, she handed me a thermos of coffee and said, "Rest. You'll need your strength. The nights only get worse." Her words settled over me like ice. I had survived a second night. But the rules were no longer just ink on paper. They were the only thing keeping me alive. By the third night, the warehouse no longer felt like a place of work. It felt like a living thing, watching me, waiting for me to slip. The rules were no longer abstract guidelines, they were lifelines. Every time I thought about ignoring them, the memory of the knocking at the frozen doors stopped me cold. That day, Marta had said little to me. She only repeated a single reminder before she left with the day shift. "Make sure the mirrors are covered." Then she handed me a bundle of heavy black cloth, frayed at the edges but strong. I didn't understand why the warehouse even had mirrors, but I didn't ask. By sundown, I found out. There were mirrors scattered in odd places throughout the warehouse, old rectangular things mounted on the walls between aisles, some cracked, some fogged. They looked like they'd been here long before the warehouse itself, as though the building had been erected around them. Nobody on the day shift seemed to pay them any mind, but once the sun dipped below the horizon, they seemed to glimmer faintly, reflecting light that wasn't there. I walked the aisles with the black cloths, covering them one by one. It should have been a simple task, but each time I approached a mirror, I felt resistance, as though the air thickened around me. My reflection seemed wrong, slightly delayed, or moving just a fraction out of sync. When I raised my hand, the figure in the glass hesitated before following. I forced myself to look away as I draped the cloth over it, pinning the fabric in place. My heart pounded with each one, and by the time I finished, sweat clung to my skin despite the cold air. But one mirror I almost missed. It was tucked behind a stack of crates, half hidden, its surface cracked from corner to corner. As I bent to cover it, I froze. My reflection was smiling. I wasn't. The face in the glass grinned widely, teeth too sharp, eyes too bright. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the cloth. My reflection tilted its head, the smile stretching wider, and then, so quickly I thought I imagined it, it mouthed the word, "Stay." I slammed the cloth over the mirror and pinned it down with shaking hands. My breath came in ragged bursts, my chest tight. I couldn't shake the image of that grin. The rest of the night dragged, every shadow twisting into something unnatural. I tried to busy myself with the logbook and inventory, but my mind kept circling back to that cracked mirror. What would have happened if I hadn't covered it? What if I'd stared too long? It was close to 1 a.m. when I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were quicker, almost playful, darting up and down the aisles. I gripped the flashlight tighter but stayed in the office, repeating the rules in my head like a prayer. Don't investigate, don't speak, don't slip. But then came something new. The intercom crackled, the static sharp and loud. I froze, waiting. A voice filtered through, faint but clear, my voice. "Why are you hiding?" it asked, calm and steady, exactly the way I spoke. I stared at the speaker, my stomach twisting. "Come see," the voice continued. "It's safe. Just one look." I clamped my hands over my ears and squeezed my eyes shut, but the sound was inside me now, vibrating in my skull. My own voice taunting me, coaxing me. When it finally went silent, I opened my eyes to find the office door ajar. I was certain I had locked it. Something moved in the corner of my vision. A dark shape slipped past the doorway, gliding silently down the hall. My flashlight beam caught nothing but shadows, but I knew I wasn't alone. My pulse hammered as I remembered the mirrors. Had I covered them all properly? The thought made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the image of the cracked one, my reflection smiling, whispering for me to stay. What if the cloth slipped? What if something had come through? I forced myself to wait until dawn. counting each second as if that alone would keep me anchored. By the time the faint light filtered through the east windows, I was shaking, my body buzzing with exhaustion and fear. As always, I followed the last rule. I walked the east wing and opened the windowed panels, my hands numb, my legs heavy. The pale light spilled across the floor, and for a moment the warehouse seemed still again, the heavy silence returning like a blanket. When Marta arrived, she studied me closely. "You saw them, didn't you?" she asked. I hesitated, then nodded. Her expression didn't change. "Good, you covered them. That's what matters." I wanted to ask what would have happened if I hadn't, but deep down, I already knew. That night, as I lay in the narrow cot they provided, staring at the ceiling, one thought refused to leave my mind. The reflection in the cracked mirror had not been me. It had been something waiting, and it knew my face now. By the fourth night, I had stopped pretending this was just a job. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a prisoner, bound to the rules written on that worn piece of paper. The warehouse wasn't a place of storage. It was something else, something that demanded obedience. All day I tried to rest, but sleep refused to come. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw that grin in the cracked mirror, teeth glistening like shards of ice, lips mouthing that single word, stay. When I did manage to drift off, the dreams were worse. In them, the aisles of the warehouse stretched forever, and no matter how far I ran, footsteps followed close behind, always just out of sight. That evening, Marta handed me a lantern before leaving. Its glass was smudged, the flame faint but steady. "Use this if the lights go out," she said. "Don't trust the dark." I almost asked why she thought I'd ever trust the dark, but I bit my tongue. Marta never explained more than she had to. She only reminded me to follow the rules, and her eyes told me the rest. Break them, and you won't survive. The shift began quietly. The wind outside had calmed, and for the first few hours the warehouse seemed almost ordinary, like the cavernous storage building I had once tried to convince myself it was. But then the intercom crackled again. At first it was just static, faint and weak. I ignored it, continuing my rounds. But then the static gave way to whispers, dozens of them, overlapping, murmuring in a language I didn't recognize. My stomach turned as I froze in place, listening. The voices rose and fell like a chant, growing louder, pressing against my skull until I thought my head would split open. Then, silence. The light above me flickered. For a moment the aisle dimmed, shadows stretching unnaturally long. I flicked on the lantern. Its flame glowed soft and golden, fighting back the gloom. The buzzing hum of the fluorescence returned, but weaker now, as if the lights were struggling against something heavier than the darkness itself. I told myself to keep moving. Standing still only made me more aware of the vast emptiness pressing in from every side. I made my way through the aisles, checking the mirrors, each still covered, each still pinned tight. But the silence wasn't comforting. It was wrong. That was when I heard it, the whispers again. Not from the intercom this time, but from the aisles themselves. They drifted from between the stacked crates, soft at first, like wind slipping through cracks. But the longer I listened, the clearer they became. "Over here," one voice hissed. "This way," another whispered, breathless and urgent. "Don't leave us," a third pleaded. My skin prickled. The voices were everywhere, weaving in and out of one another, circling me. My grip tightened on the lantern as I scanned the shadows. The rule about footsteps was burned into my mind, but there had been no mention of whispers. Did that mean I was allowed to follow them? Or was this another trap, something waiting for me to falter? I stayed rooted to the spot, forcing myself to breathe evenly. The whispers grew louder, angrier. They rose in pitch until they weren't whispers anymore. They were screams, echoing through the aisles, rattling the shelves. My ears rang, my heart slammed against my ribs, and I staggered back, nearly dropping the lantern. Then silence again. Sudden, crushing silence. I realized I wasn't alone. At the end of the aisle, half shrouded in shadow, stood a figure. Too far to make out clearly, but tall, thin, unmoving. My flashlight beam shook in my hands as I pointed it toward the shape. For a split second, it illuminated a face. My face. Then it was gone. I ran, the lantern swinging wildly, shadows chasing me with every step. I didn't stop until I reached the office, slamming the door shut and locking it. My chest heaved, sweat dripped down my neck, and I forced myself not to look at the small square of glass in the office window. I was afraid of what might be staring back at me. The rest of the night was a blur. The whispers returned in waves, sometimes soft, sometimes shrieking, always circling just beyond reach. I kept the lantern burning until dawn, clutching it like a lifeline. When the first gray light crept over the horizon, I dragged myself to the east wing. My hands shook as I opened the windowed panels one by one, each creak of the hinges a reminder that the rules were all that stood between me and whatever waited in the dark. Marta arrived minutes later. She looked at me, her gaze lingering on the lantern still clutched in my hand, the wild look in my eyes. For once, she spoke more than a few words. "They're testing you," she said quietly. "The longer you stay, the harder they'll try. They want you to slip. They want you to answer. But you must never answer." I wanted to scream at her, demand to know who they were, why the warehouse existed, why any of this was happening. But I couldn't. My throat felt raw, my voice gone. Instead, I sat in silence, staring at the warehouse floor, and realized something chilling. Each night, the rules weren't just keeping me alive. They were holding back something that wanted me, something that was learning me, piece by piece. By the fifth night, my nerves were so frayed I could hardly hold the flashlight steady. My hands shook constantly, and every sound, every hum of the lights, every groan of the steel walls felt like a warning. Sleep during the day had become nearly impossible. When I did manage to drift off, I woke gasping, certain I had heard knocking, or whispers, or footsteps right outside my door. When Marta handed me the clipboard that evening, she hesitated. For the first time since I had arrived, her mask of cold indifference cracked. I saw something flicker across her face. Pity, maybe even guilt. "If you see anything new tonight," she said quietly, "don't touch it. Don't even go near it. You understand?" Her words chilled me more than the Arctic air. The shift began as it always did, with silence pressing down like a weight. I carried the lantern with me, its faint flame steady, as I checked the aisles. The rules echoed in my head with each step. Don't investigate footsteps. Don't leave after midnight. Keep the mirrors covered. Don't speak into the intercom. Don't go near the frozen doors. Open the panels at dawn. But there was one rule I dreaded most tonight. Rule number 6. Should you find any boxes unmarked with inventory numbers, leave them untouched. Report them immediately. The first few hours passed without incident. The wind outside was calmer, the whispers had not yet begun, and the intercom stayed silent. For a while, I almost convinced myself the night might pass quietly. But then, at around 2 a.m., I turned a corner into aisle 17 and stopped dead. In the middle of the floor sat a crate. It hadn't been there before. I knew that aisle well. I'd walked it just an hour earlier, empty except for the stacked shelves. Now, the crate stood in the open, alone, as if it had been placed there deliberately. It was different from the others. Most of the warehouse crates were stamped with bold black numbers, tags, and barcodes. This one had nothing. Just bare wood, frost clinging to the edges, the grain warped as if it had been soaking in the cold for decades. I felt a pull toward it, the same way I'd felt when I heard the knocking at the frozen doors. A compulsion, subtle but insistent, whispering in the back of my mind, "Open it. See what's inside." I forced myself to take a step back. Rule 6. Don't touch. Don't open. Report it. But my eyes stayed locked on the crate. The longer I stared, the more I swore it shifted. Not physically, its shape remained the same, but the shadows around it seemed to move, stretching and bending, curling toward me like smoke. Then came the sound, a faint scratching from inside, slow, deliberate, as though something within was testing the walls, searching for a way out. I bit down on my tongue until I tasted blood, using the pain to ground myself. I turned away, forcing my legs to move, forcing myself back toward the office. But before I made it 2 steps, the intercom above me hissed to life. "Don't leave me," a voice whispered. I froze. The voice didn't come from the crate. It came from the ceiling speaker, but it was connected somehow, the words echoing in rhythm with the scratching inside the wood. The lantern flame flickered. My shadow stretched along the wall, twitching unnaturally, as though it wasn't following my movements anymore. I gripped the rules in my pocket so tightly the paper crumpled in my fist. Don't respond. Don't touch. Don't slip. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, then knocking, 3 sharp raps against the inside of the crate. The same rhythm I had heard against the frozen doors. My chest tightened. Sweat prickled down my back. I stumbled backward down the aisle, keeping the lantern raised, but the crate seemed closer every time I blinked, as though the shadows were carrying it toward me. The intercom whispered again, softer now, coaxing. You don't have to be afraid. Open it. It's yours. My knees buckled and I nearly fell. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My body shook, caught between terror and temptation. A thought wormed its way into my skull. What if the crate held answers? What if Marta had been lying, keeping secrets? What if the only way to truly understand was to break the rules, just once? The lantern flame flared suddenly, burning brighter, snapping me out of the trance. I forced myself to move, to stumble down the aisle, not daring to look back. I reached the office, slammed the door, locked it, and collapsed into the chair. For the rest of the night, the scratching never stopped. It echoed through the steel walls, a relentless reminder that the crate was still there, waiting. The intercom whispered at intervals, repeating the same phrase over and over. Open it. It's yours. I covered my ears, buried my head in my arms, and tried not to listen. But the voice wormed into me all the same, burrowing deep, settling like a seed. When dawn finally came, I staggered through the aisles to the east wing, every step heavy. The crate was gone. The aisle was empty again, as though it had never been there. I opened the windowed panels, let the pale light spill in, and felt some of the crushing weight lift. But the relief was short-lived. When Marta arrived, she studied me closely, her eyes searching my face. She didn't ask if I'd seen anything. She didn't have to. She already knew. Instead, she said, they'll try harder now. Don't let them win. I wanted to ask her what would happen if I did, but I was too afraid of the answer, because deep down I already felt it. Whatever was inside that crate hadn't just scratched at the wood, it had scratched its way into me. The storm outside had not eased since that night when the warehouse revealed its true nature. Instead, it had grown stronger, howling like a wounded beast, shaking the walls and roof as if trying to tear them away from the frozen earth. The men had begun whispering about omens, about the Arctic being a graveyard that tolerated no trespassers. I didn't need their whispers to know the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes. The warehouse was alive. It watched. It remembered. It punished. I had stopped sleeping properly. The faintest creak of the walls jolted me awake. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, stretching unnaturally across the frozen floor, even when no light source explained them. And every night at exactly 3:13, the same scratching returned from beneath the floorboards. At first it was faint, then louder, as though whatever lay beneath was clawing its way up to us. We followed the rules, at least we tried to. Rule 1, never enter Storage 7 after dark. Rule 2, do not whistle inside the warehouse. Rule 3, do not speak to anyone who doesn't answer you twice. Rule 4, when you hear scratching, keep your eyes closed. Rule 5, if the siren wails, hide, do not run. Rule 6, never under any circumstance leave during a storm. The rules had been written to keep us alive, but they were crumbling around us now. After Eric's disappearance, the others started to lose their grip. 3 nights ago, Anders broke down sobbing, muttering to himself that the rules were a trap, not a salvation. He claimed the warehouse fed on obedience, that the more we followed, the stronger it became. He was wrong, though. I was sure of it. I had seen what happened when rules were broken. The warehouse did not forgive. Still, Anders decided he would test his theory. That night, while the wind clawed at the windows and the aurora painted green fire across the black sky, he walked into Storage 7 after dark. We tried to stop him, but he only laughed. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale as if the life had already been drained from him. He stepped inside, the metal door groaning shut behind him. We waited outside for nearly an hour, listening. At first there was silence, then a low humming sound, almost like a choir of voices in the distance. Then came the screaming. We never saw Anders again. But the next morning, there were new scratches along the inside of the Storage 7 door. The warehouse was hungrier now. That night, I heard Eric's voice. It came from the hall outside my bunk, calling my name in a low, strained whisper. My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't heard his voice in weeks, not since he vanished during the siren incident. I called back, "Eric?" There was silence. I called again, louder. Then the voice came back, almost right outside the door. "Open up." I froze. My skin prickled with cold sweat. I remembered Rule 3, Do not speak to anyone who doesn't answer you twice. I had spoken once. I had spoken twice. And Eric had only answered me once. I sat perfectly still, clutching the blanket as if it could shield me from what stood outside. The door handle turned slowly, as though unseen fingers were testing it. But the lock held. Then the whisper came again, right against the wood. You broke the rule. Now let me in. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Eventually the sound faded, but I knew Eric, or whatever wore his voice, was still nearby. The next day, the men avoided me. They said I had talked in my sleep, muttering in some language they couldn't understand, a guttural growl like the creak of the warehouse itself. I didn't remember it, but their frightened stares were enough. The rules were not just keeping us alive, they were changing us. The storm outside raged on without end, trapping us. Supplies were running low. Our food rations had been cut to almost nothing. The men grew thinner, weaker, more paranoid, but no one dared suggest leaving. Rule 6 bound us as tightly as chains. Then came the siren. It began without warning, a shrill metallic wail that rattled the beams and shook the very air. The men scattered instantly, diving into their hiding places like trained animals. I sprinted into the nearest container, pulling the door shut behind me. The sound vibrated through my bones, making my teeth ache. And then came the footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, echoing across the warehouse floor. Slow, searching. I pressed my ear against the cold wall of the container, trying to hear more. Something was moving through the aisles, dragging its feet, breathing in deep guttural rasps. The footsteps stopped right outside my hiding place. I held my breath, clenching my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. The metal groaned as something brushed against it. Then, silence. I waited for what felt like hours before the siren stopped. When I finally emerged, most of the men were gone. Their hiding spots were empty, doors left ajar. Only 2 of us remained in the open, me and Victor, the oldest of the crew. His face was ashen, eyes wide with terror. He didn't speak. He just stared at the floor, trembling. That night, Victor tried to hang himself. I cut him down before the rope could do its work. He fought me with surprising strength, screaming that he wouldn't be taken like the others. I dragged him back to his bunk, but I knew he wouldn't last. The warehouse was winning. I began hearing voices constantly after that. Not just Eric's, but voices of men I had never met. They whispered from the cracks in the walls, from beneath the floor, from inside the very containers we guarded. They spoke of the cold, of the hunger, of rules written not for safety, but for sacrifice. The scratches beneath the floor grew louder, angrier. Some nights I swore I could see the wood bowing upward, as though something enormous was pressing against it, desperate to break through. Finally, Victor disappeared too. I woke to find his bunk empty, the rope lying discarded on the floor. A trail of frozen footprints led to storage 7. The door was ajar, and beyond it, darkness. Now I am alone. The storm still howls outside, and the aurora burns bright above the ice. The warehouse groans and shifts as if breathing. The scratching has not stopped in days. I know what it wants. I know why the rules exist. The warehouse does not keep intruders out. It keeps what's inside from getting free. And I am the last thing standing between the world and whatever waits below. The rules have one final lesson, not survival, containment. I sit at this desk, writing my account with frozen fingers, listening as the scratching finally becomes cracking. The floorboards splinter. The air fills with the stench of rot and something older, something that does not belong in this world. The siren begins again, louder than ever. I have nowhere left to hide. The last rule is the only one that matters now. Never leave during a storm. Because when the storm ends, whatever is inside will finally walk free. And there will be no rules left to save us. Thank you for spending your night with Dr. Snooze. Your support means more than words can say. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe, because together we'll keep the stories alive one night at a time.